Having removed these and given them a clean, it's a good idea to just note which way they went in so you can keep the orientation the same. Just also inside the swinging arm, if you're tipping it about, there is a spacer. Now when you push that back in, you need to be careful because it has to be lifted up to get it back home, and I'll show you what I mean. If you can see in there, it's dropped down. You see that?
Yep.
Just put your finger in and lift it up, and that's, see, that's now home. That's dropped down. It's really hard to film this, and that's back in. So you just need to be aware of that. I'm going to take that out for a minute. Grease wise, I'm going to use Silcoline Pro RG2, which is a synthetic waterproof grease that's ideal for bearings. This side, you can't really get to the bearing that easy, but I'm just going to try and force some in. Hopefully that will do the job, and then we'll just put a little bit on here. Like that. But this one we should be able to get loads of grease in there. Alright, let's give that a nice, you don't want too much. I know it looks like I'm putting a lot on, but you don't want too much. Just work it in to the bearing. Hopefully that will keep them good for a few more years to come. It's dry, really dry that is. So we need to put that spacer in now. Like that. Just have a feel, make sure that is home, which it is. And I'll do the same on this one, just give this a coating of grease. And then plop that back in the hole. Okay, so while we've got the swinging arm out, it would be silly not to take this drop link off and grease the bearings. It's held in with a 8mm Allen key head bolt and a 14mm nut. You can get round the back of the header tank and get a spanner up there to hold it. So once you've done that, I've taken the nut off already. And just take that out. So let's just pop the bearing sleeves out of this. And let's see how dry it is. Let's get a torch. There's a bit of grease in there. So what I found is this grease is quite dried and horrible, so very gently with a flat bladed screwdriver, I'm just going to scrape it out very gently. Don't really want to damage the bearing surfaces. You can see it's quite solidified. So what I ended up doing with an old blunt screwdriver is just digging out these needle rollers. Obviously if you're going to do that, do like I've done and have a towel down so you don't lose any. And just see all this old dried grease. So I'm glad I've done that, and I shall clean these off and repack them with some new grease. So that's the needle rollers out and back in, all that old gunky grease taken out. So I'm just going to work some grease into the rollers as well now, just to make sure that we do pack the bearing nicely. And what you need to do is just wipe off this bearing guide, make sure that's nice and clean. Make sure there's not any nasty gouges or anything like that in it. Put some grease on that. You just need to make sure that that is nice and moving nice and smoothly, and then you know all your needles are back in properly. That was lovely. When you go to refit your drop link plates, you'll notice that it's marked RSU and SA. RSU is for rear suspension unit, SA is for swinging arm. The writing goes to the right hand side on both plates. Okay, and just to show you this frame adjustment sleeve, as you can see, it has got an edge to it, and that's what you're winding with that tool. Okay, so when you've refitted your swinging arm and you've pushed your bolt all the way through, we will need to push it back just a little bit, just to get to that frame adjustment sleeve. Now, the torque for this is 6 Newton meters. So what I'm going to do is just wind it by hand, just till I feel it bottom out on the swinging arm. Get myself a little torque wrench. There we go. The swinging arm nut, in the factory manual they recommend that you throw it away and fit a new nut. I've looked at it, I can't see anything wrong with it, and it is a straight torque figure, 110 Newton meters. So I'm just going to use a couple of drops of Loctite, lock and seal, on the threads, and that should be okay. So the swinging arm nut can be torqued up now. There we go. One of the other things I forgot to mention is that it does tell you on the service sheet to check the drive chain rubbing strip. Obviously it'd be a lot easier to change it when the swinging arm's right out and you've got it there. I couldn't actually find any data for wear limits, so I suppose you just check that it's not too worn down. You can see mine is a little worn down there, but it's got a bit of life in it yet, so I should just keep an eye on that. So you've got your shock absorber top mounting bolt there, and the 3 down here on the drop link plate. All those fixings are 48 Newton meters, and they must be tightened when the weight of the bike is on the ground. Before we refit the rear brake caliper back into the swinging arm, it's worth noting that you can only remove the rear brake caliper by taking out the back wheel. It's kind of a strange design quirk, I think it's really odd. Anyway, part of the service is to check that the brake pads are the correct thickness and also that the piston isn't seized. So before I refit it, we're going to do that. What I should have done is this pin, you need a 4mm pin punch. I should have knocked that pin out whilst it was mounted to the bike. I have managed to do it like this by just laying the caliper like that and using a bit of wood and then tapping it. So there's a little clip that comes out, so we'll take that, that's already out. Just push that pin through. Watch out because the pads can fall out if you're not careful. Take the pin out. So we can take our brake pads out. As you can see, mine are quite good thickness, so I don't need to worry about that. And as you can see, my piston is quite dirty, so I'm going to get that cleaned up. Also, it's worth lubricating these sliders. Now, to separate the carrier from the caliper, what you're first going to need to do if you've got an ABS bike like this is take the speed sensor off. So it's just a 30 torques. So we'll just undo that. Be careful because there is a little washer underneath here that acts as a spacer, so don't lose that. Like that, out that comes. Then you can take the ABS sensor off. And then what you've got is you've got 2 rubber boots. So you just need to tease those off. Be careful you don't rip them, tear them. There we go. There we go, and now we can clean and grease the slider pins, and also it gives me better access for cleaning the piston. Okay, to check that the piston's free, what you'll need to do is temporarily fit the bolts back in for the hill guard, because that holds the master cylinder. And then just pump the foot pedal, and as you can see, my piston's moving nice. It's coming out, so we need to make sure that it goes in. Also, when you're pushing it in, just be mindful of the fluid level, but you should be able to push it in with your fingers, and as you can see, I can push mine in, so mine's nice and free. I've given it a clean off with some brake cleaner, and also those slider pins I've cleaned up and I've greased, and I've also cleaned the foot where the pads sit in as well, so I can now reassemble this. Right, so before we refit the rear wheel, just need to do up those 2 clips for the brake hose, because you can't get to those easily with the wheel on. I've cleaned and greased the wheel spindle, ready to go in. Spacers wise, the spacer with the flange goes on the right hand side of the bike, and the spacer that's plain goes on the left hand side of the bike, and I've cleaned and greased those as well. As you can see, the back wheel's now in. I was going to film it, the battery ran out on the camcorder as we were doing it, so I'm just going to explain how we did it. I'm not going to lie, it was awkward, it was quite tense, because I didn't want to scratch or damage or chip anything. The way that I did it was that I wheeled the wheel into the swinging arm, put the chain round the sprocket, I then pushed the wheel forward as far as I could. I'd left the brake pads out of the brake caliper, slid the caliper in. There's a alignment, there's a slot that the caliper goes into. It's important that you make sure that goes in. I was then able to get this flanged washer in, which goes on the right hand side with the flange side outwards. I was then able to get the plain spacer in, and then using a bit of wood, lifted the wheel up into the swinging arm, and then was able to get the spindle through. Once you've done that, you then need to check your chain adjustment, because it would have changed anyway. It's 13 to 32 millimeters, halfway between both sprockets. You want to check it in several places and adjust it at the tightest point. I always aim for slightly loose. I normally aim for about 25 millimeters of free play there. Once you've done that, you need to make sure that the wheel is aligned. There are adjustment dots on the swinging arm. Some people say that these are inaccurate, and I do tend to agree. I use a laser tool, which I'll show you in a minute. Some people use vernier calipers, some people measure between the swinging arm bolt and the spindle. It's up to you, whatever you're happy with. Once you've done all that, you need to torque that nut up to 110 Newton meters. Just show you quickly what I use for chain alignment. It's called a Profi laser cap. You put this flat surface on your sprocket, there's a laser, and I'll show you how it works. So as you can see, if I lay that on the sprocket, we can see that the laser dot is on the inside link there. And then if I just rotate the chain, or the wheel, you'll see that go up the chain. And as you can see, that laser dot is bang on the inside of that link as it was at the back. So I'm happy that my chain's aligned. We're nearly finished on the back end. Finally, all we need to do is check the wheel bearing. So if you don't know how to do that, first just spin the wheel, feel for any roughness, and then secondly grasp it at the top and the bottom and give it a nice shake. You're feeling for any free play. And then lastly, don't forget, if you've got any grease or oil on the tyre, to wipe it off. I use baby wipes. That does the job.